"Get this black trash out of my office." The words hit Layla Bennett like a slap across the face. The voice of Khalid Zamir, booming with disdain, echoed through the pristine office, sharp and cruel. His eyes, cold and condescending, locked onto her as she stood by the desk, frozen for a moment. He towered over her like a predator, his expensive suit gleaming, his arrogance filling every inch of the room. Layla's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. Slowly, she bent down to pick up the trash that had been carelessly tossed aside, her small hands trembling but steady. She didn't dare look up. She couldn't. She knew the moment she did, Khalid would see the fear in her eyes, and that would only give him more power over her. Khalid's harsh laughter echoed in the air, but he wasn't laughing at a joke. "The cleaner's worthless daughter," he muttered to his assistant, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's as stupid as her monkey mother." Layla's jaw clenched. His words stung, but she didn't let them show. She focused on the scattered papers in front of her, blocking out the cruel sound of his voice. She had heard it all before. The taunts, the insults, the degradation. It was nothing new. But what was new, what she hadn't expected, was the forceful grip of his hand on her wrist. His rings dug into her skin, leaving bruises before she even had the chance to react. "You understand nothing, do you, little animal?" he snarled, his voice low and venomous, the words dripping with malice. Layla's breath caught, but she didn't say a word. She wouldn't. Not to him. She met his eyes, her own gaze steady and unwavering. His grip tightened, but she didn't flinch. She didn't have to. She pulled her wrist free in one swift motion, her fingers just grazing his expensive fabric as she stepped back. The moment felt endless, but Layla's resolve held strong. Khalid, for a second, seemed stunned, but only for a second. His eyes narrowed in disgust. "Stupid little girl," he sneered, pushing past her, stepping on the papers she had just collected as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Get out of my sight." Layla didn't move, not immediately. She stood tall, fists clenched at her sides, her heart still pounding in her chest. She could feel the burn of his words in her skin, in her soul. But she knew something he didn't, something that would change everything. She understood every single word he had said, every insult, every disgusting detail of his plan. And in exactly 72 hours, she would use that knowledge to destroy his empire. The fluorescent light flickered above her as she gathered the last of the scattered papers. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had to act, and she had to act now. What Layla had heard wasn't just the ramblings of a rich man with too much power. It was the key to exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud. But how could she make them listen? How could she get anyone to believe her? The clock was ticking. Layla would find a way, and she would make Khalid Zamir regret ever underestimating her. The next day, Layla sat quietly at her desk in the small, cramped apartment, her eyes scanning the window across the courtyard. She watched as Mrs. Amina struggled with the paperwork in front of her. The Somali mother's tears streamed down her face as she tried to make sense of the city housing documents, her hands shaking as she communicated with the city official. Layla's stomach tightened. She had seen this before. The helplessness, the fear. It was the same look her own mother wore when faced with a language barrier, when they couldn't get the help they needed. "Mama, why is she crying?" Layla asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tara, her mother, glanced up from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She pulled Layla close, her expression a mix of empathy and resignation. "Sometimes, baby girl, when people can't speak the same language, they can't get help, even when they really need it." Layla nodded, but inside, she felt something stir deep in her chest. That night, she downloaded her first language app. Her fingers tapped quickly across the screen, her mind focused on the mission ahead. She wasn't just going to help people like Mrs. Amina. She was going to change everything. The next day at work, Layla found herself standing beside her mother in the same building she had cleaned countless times before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she wiped down the windows. But today was different. She had overheard something far more dangerous than just insults. She had heard the blueprint for a criminal empire, and she was the only one who could stop it. She kept her head low, making sure no one noticed the weight of her thoughts. Khalid had talked about $500 million like it was nothing, dismissing everything that mattered. But Layla knew that it wasn't just money at stake anymore. It was the lives of the people in her community, people like Theo and the Ortiz kids, who were counting on affordable housing. As Layla wiped down the windows, she glanced at her mother, who was busy organizing cleaning supplies. Tara caught her eye for a moment, and Layla saw something flicker in her gaze, concern. But Layla couldn't tell her yet. She didn't want to put her mother in any more danger. Layla took a deep breath. She knew what had to be done. She had to get the truth to Mr. Lawson, but how? No one would listen to a 12-year-old girl, especially one from the projects. As they finished cleaning, Layla heard the muffled sound of a conversation from the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Khalid again. We'll steal their money, while this garbage cleans up after us. Layla's hands clenched into fists. This time, there was no turning back. She had heard enough. Tara looked over at Layla, her face filled with unease. "Baby girl," she said quietly, "you've been quiet all day. Is something wrong?" Layla met her mother's eyes, her throat tight. "I heard something," she said softly. "Something about a deal. $500 million. Khalid, he's going to hurt people, Mama. The housing project he's talking about. It's where Theo's family was supposed to move, where the Ortiz kids were supposed to get their own rooms." Tara froze, the cleaning cloth in her hand slipping to the floor. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "You don't even speak Arabic." Layla's eyes filled with determination. "Yes, I do, Mama. I taught myself." She pulled out her phone and opened one of the language learning apps. "I heard him. Everything. I know what he's planning, and we have to stop it." Tara stared at her daughter, speechless. She didn't know what to say. Layla was right. It didn't make sense. But the fear in her eyes was real. "You've never learned anything like this, Layla. You can't understand all of that." Tara's voice was shaky now, but Layla didn't hesitate. She pulled out a piece of paper and began scribbling down the Arabic words she had heard Khalid use. "I learned it," Layla said quietly. "I helped refugees at the community center. They taught me. Mrs. Amina taught me." Tara sank down onto an overturned bucket, her hands shaking as she looked at her daughter. For the first time, she saw something in Layla's eyes that she had never noticed before. Intelligence, purpose, fire. Layla's voice softened. "We have to tell someone, Mama. We have to tell Mr. Lawson. He'll believe me." Tara shook her head, her voice filled with doubt. "Mr. Lawson? He's not going to listen to us, Layla. We're just the help." Layla's gaze hardened, her words fierce. "Then we'll make them listen." The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of what Layla was about to do. Her mother didn't know if it was possible, but Layla knew one thing for certain. If they didn't act now, it would be too late. She wasn't just a cleaning lady's daughter anymore. She was the only one who had the power to stop Khalid, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. But the question remained, would anyone believe her? Would anyone listen to a 12-year-old girl who could bring down a criminal empire? Layla's time was running out. The next morning, Layla and her mother stood before the towering glass doors of the corporate building. The air was thick with tension, and Layla could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her chest. She had made the decision. Now she had to act. As they entered the lobby, Layla's eyes scanned the room. She knew the drill. She had cleaned this building more times than she could count, but today was different. Today, she wasn't just a cleaning lady's daughter. Today, she was here to save lives. Khalid had made one fatal mistake. He'd underestimated her. He'd thought she was nothing, just a child, a nobody. But he was wrong. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the elevator, her palms sweating. "Are you sure about this, baby?" Tara's voice trembled, filled with concern. Layla nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "I have to, Mama. I have to stop him." The elevator doors slid open, and the two women stepped inside. The ride-up felt like it took hours, each floor they passed feeling like it was pulling them further into the unknown. The world outside the elevator seemed distant, muffled, as if Layla was stepping into another realm. One where adults had all the power, where they made the decisions, and where people like her were invisible. The doors opened to the executive floor. Layla's steps faltered for just a second, but she didn't let herself stop. Her mother, a few steps behind her, was visibly uneasy. The security guard, Marcus, stood at his post, eyeing them suspiciously as they approached. "Ma'am, Mr. Lawson didn't authorize." "It's okay, Marcus," Layla interrupted, her voice unwavering. "Mr. Lawson is expecting us." Marcus glanced at her, skeptical, but said nothing. As they moved past him, Layla could feel his eyes boring into her back. It wasn't just the guard who doubted her. It was everyone in this building. But she would prove them all wrong. When they reached Mr. Lawson's office, the door was open. Layla could hear the faint hum of a conversation inside. She knocked softly, her heart in her throat. Tara lingered behind, her eyes full of doubt. "Come in," Mr. Lawson's voice called from inside. Layla took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Mr. Lawson sat behind his massive desk, his features softening as he looked up at her. His usual businesslike demeanor seemed to fade as he noticed Layla standing before him, small but somehow larger than life. "Ah, Layla," he said, offering a warm smile. "What brings you here today?" Layla didn't hesitate. Her words tumbled out, urgent and steady. "Mr. Lawson, I overheard something. Something bad. Something dangerous." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I heard Khalid Zamir's plan. He's going to steal $500 million from you." Mr. Lawson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Layla, you know how serious these things are. Are you sure about what you're saying?" Layla didn't flinch. She was sure. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I can prove it. I understand Arabic. He said he's going to use fake contracts to trick you. And when you try to stop him, he'll make you pay $200 million in penalties." Mr. Lawson's eyebrows furrowed, clearly taken aback. "You understand Arabic?" Layla nodded. "I taught myself. I've been learning it to help the refugee kids at the community center. Mrs. Amina taught me." "I heard him, Mr. Lawson. Every word." She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone, quickly scrolling through the language learning apps she'd used. She played a clip from one of her lessons, translating it seamlessly as the rapid Arabic flowed through the speakers. David Lawson's eyes widened, his jaw dropping as he heard the perfect translation. He leaned forward in his chair, disbelief in his expression. You're serious." Layla nodded again. "I'm serious. He plans to take over the housing project, tear it down, and build luxury resorts for the rich. He's going to leave the poor people who were supposed to move there homeless." For a moment, there was a stunned silence in the room. Tara, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward, her face filled with both fear and pride. David Lawson blinked, processing everything. This is unbelievable," he murmured, his mind racing. "How do you know all of this, Layla?" "I told you, Mr. Lawson," she said quietly. "I heard it. I can translate. I know exactly what he's planning." David sat back in his chair, a long silence hanging in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with awe. "Layla, your courage and intelligence. You've just saved this company from losing everything." Layla's eyes filled with determination. "We still have time to stop him, but we need to act fast." David looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. "What you've done today, Layla, it's more than just stopping a fraud. It's about protecting people. It's about standing up for what's right." Layla's heart raced. She wasn't done. Not yet. But there was still one question she couldn't answer. Would they act in time? Would they believe her before it was too late? The conference room was cold, the air thick with the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. Layla sat at the edge of the massive table, her small frame barely making a dent in the oversized chair. The mahogany stretched out before her like an ocean, the polished surface gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. David Lawson stood at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sharp intensity. His fingers drummed lightly on the surface, but his eyes were fixed on the senior partners seated around him. They were all here, the people who held the reins of the company's future, the ones who would decide whether Layla's revelation would be taken seriously. Margaret Foster, the senior partner with the icy gaze, leaned back in her chair, adjusting her designer glasses. She was the first to speak, her voice dripping with skepticism. "David," she said, her tone condescending, "you want us to delay a $500 million deal because of something a child claims to have overheard." David's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "It's not just something a child overheard." Layla speaks fluent Arabic. She understood every word Khalid Zamir said, and she's the one who exposed the fraud. The partners exchanged skeptical glances, their faces unreadable. Layla's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to look away. She had come too far to be dismissed now. Robert Carter, another senior partner, scoffed, his voice dripping with derision. "You've got to be kidding me. We're going to take legal advice from the cleaning lady's daughter? This is absurd. She's 12 years old, David." James Sullivan, leaning back in his chair, added dismissively, "Children mishear things. They make up stories to get attention." Layla's fists clenched in her lap. The words stung, but she didn't let them show. Instead, she looked directly at the partners, her eyes unwavering. She had been invisible to them until now. But not anymore. Margaret Foster's voice rose. "This is exactly what happens when you let the help bring their kids to work. They get these wild ideas, and now we're supposed to believe a 12-year-old girl over Harvard Law graduates." Tears of frustration welled up in Layla's eyes, but she fought them back. She wasn't going to let them see her cry. "Not today." David's voice rang out sharply. "Margaret, you will listen to her." Layla's translation was flawless. "If you don't trust a 12-year-old who saved us from losing everything, then you've got bigger problems than Khalid Zamir." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Tara stood by the door, her hands trembling as she watched her daughter stand her ground. She had never seen Layla like this, so strong, so sure of herself. Margaret's face turned red, her arrogance faltering. "You want us to trust a child over professional translators and legal experts?" she sneered. Layla didn't flinch. She stood up from her chair, her small feet barely touching the floor. "You can call me whatever you want," she said quietly, her voice firm and calm. "You can call me a liar, a fantasy maker, a cleaning lady's brat. But the truth is the truth. Khalid Zamir is trying to steal from you, and I'm the only one who can stop him." For a long moment, no one said a word. The silence was deafening. Then, to everyone's surprise, David Lawson stood up, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "Layla is right. We have to stop Khalid, and we have to do it now." The senior partners exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret's face flushed with embarrassment, but she didn't speak. Instead, she just folded her arms, her eyes narrowed, but no longer filled with the same arrogance. David turned to Layla. "We're going to need your help, Layla. Can you do this? Can you help us stop Khalid?" Layla's eyes glinted with determination. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said quietly. "You won't regret it." As she spoke, a faint click echoed from her phone. She'd received a message, a video from Mrs. Amina. Layla quickly opened the clip, her heart racing as the message played. It was Khalid. He was speaking rapidly in Arabic, his voice laced with a venomous smugness. He was talking to his assistant, describing in detail the final steps of his fraudulent plan, the timeline, the penalties. The housing project was set to be demolished, and Layla could hear the laughter in Khalid's voice as he mocked the stupid Americans who wouldn't catch the deception. Layla's blood ran cold, but her resolve hardened. She had the evidence now. She had everything she needed. "Here it is," Layla said, showing the video to the room. She translated as Khalid's voice filled the conference room, each word confirming the fraud they had feared. David Lawson's face darkened. "It's over. We've got him." The senior partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of the evidence pressing down on them. Margaret Foster opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to Layla, then to David. She was silenced by the undeniable truth. David turned back to the partners, his tone resolute. "We move forward with Layla's plan. We expose Khalid for what he is, and we save the project. Layla, you're now our official consultant." Layla smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself all day. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. But there was no time to rest. The final battle was still ahead, and Khalid was going to fight back. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as Khalid Zamir strode in, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His arrogance filled the room before he even spoke. His legal team flanked him, each one looking just as polished and self-assured as their boss. But there was something different about Khalid today, something darker, more determined. David Lawson stood at the head of the table, his posture straight, his demeanor calm, but underneath it all, his heart raced. The final confrontation had arrived. This was the moment. Layla sat in the corner, her eyes glued to the screen of her tablet, appearing to be lost in her world of coloring apps. But in reality, she was the eyes and ears of the operation. Her fingers hovered above the screen, ready to capture every word Khalid would say. The door slammed shut behind Khalid as he took his seat at the table. His assistant, a wiry man with sharp features, stood by his side, looking at everyone with quiet suspicion. Khalid's eyes flicked to Layla in the corner, but he didn't acknowledge her. To him, she was just another piece of the furniture, insignificant. David cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. "Gentlemen, welcome. I trust we're ready to finalize the terms of our agreement." Khalid flashed a smile, his teeth too white, too sharp. "Of course, Mr. Lawson. I've brought the final documents. The terms are non-negotiable." He laid a thick stack of papers on the table, his eyes gleaming with malice. Layla's heart pounded as she watched Khalid's every move. This was it. This was where it all came to a head. David smiled coolly, his gaze never leaving Khalid. "I'm sure we'll have no issues with the terms. However, I'd like to have our new linguistic consultant review the Arabic sections before we proceed." Khalid's smile faltered for just a moment. He glanced over at Layla, but it was quick, barely perceptible. He could never have guessed what was coming next. Layla, sitting quietly in the corner, had been waiting for this moment. Her fingers brushed the tablet screen, and instantly, a red dot appeared on David's phone. Khalid's eyes flicked to David, then back to Layla, suspicion creeping into his features. "Is this necessary?" he asked, his voice tinged with an edge of irritation. David glanced down at his phone, pretending to read a message, but his mind was focused. "Yes, I believe it is," he replied smoothly. "After all, we don't want to miss any important details." Khalid's smile disappeared completely, and his posture stiffened. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the table in a nervous rhythm. "I'm sure the terms are perfectly clear, Mr. Lawson. There's no need for—" But before he could finish, Layla's voice interrupted him, calm and steady. "Actually, Mr. Zamir," she said, her gaze unwavering, "you're wrong." Khalid's eyes snapped to hers, his expression darkening. He opened his mouth to speak, but Layla continued without hesitation. "The terms you've provided are far from clear. In fact, they're full of loopholes meant to trap your partners. And the hidden penalties? Well, let's just say they're not in your favor." The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at Layla now, disbelief etched on their faces. She was no longer the invisible child in the corner. She was the one holding the truth, and everyone knew it. Khalid's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" he spat, his voice low and venomous. "You think I don't know what you're up to? You think I didn't expect someone to catch on?" Layla didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes locked onto his with a quiet defiance. "I'm stopping you. I'm making sure you don't get away with this. Not today. Not ever." Khalid's assistant shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his boss and Layla. He could feel the tension crackling in the air, the pressure building to a breaking point. David stepped forward, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Enough, Khalid," he said firmly. "We have the proof. We have the evidence. This deal is over. You're done." Khalid's face twisted in fury, but he held himself back. For a moment, he said nothing. Instead, he turned to his assistant, muttering something in rapid Arabic. Layla's fingers moved quickly across the tablet, translating the words with deadly accuracy. "How could you let this happen?" Khalid hissed to his assistant. "I paid them off. I paid them well enough. Why wasn't this child exposed sooner?" Layla's blood ran cold, but her resolve hardened. She had the evidence now. She had everything she needed. David Lawson's face darkened. "It's over. We've got him. The The senior partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of the evidence pressing down on them. Margaret Foster opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to Layla, then to David. She was silenced by the undeniable truth. David turned back to Layla. "We're going to need your help, Layla. Can you do this? Can you help us stop Khalid?" Layla's eyes glinted with determination. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said quietly. "You won't regret it." As she spoke, a faint click echoed from her phone. She'd received a message, a video from Mrs. Amina. Layla quickly opened the clip, her heart racing as the message played. It was Khalid. He was speaking rapidly in Arabic, his voice laced with a venomous smugness. He was talking to his assistant, describing in detail the final steps of his fraudulent plan, the timeline, the penalties. The housing project was set to be demolished, and Layla could hear the laughter in Khalid's voice as he mocked the stupid Americans who wouldn't catch the deception. Layla's blood ran cold, but her resolve hardened. She had the proof now. She had everything she needed. "Here it is," Layla said, showing the video to the room. She translated as Khalid's voice filled the conference room, each word confirming the fraud they had feared. David Lawson's face darkened. "It's over. We got him." The senior partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale with the weight of Layla's revelation. Margaret's mouth opened, but she couldn't find the words. Khalid's face went white. His empire, his future, was slipping through his fingers. But there was no time to celebrate yet. The next move would be the most dangerous of all. The clock ticked down, each second dragging out the inevitable. Layla sat in her corner, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the otherwise tense room. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was hanging by a thread. The battle was far from over. If Khalid had one last card to play, she needed to be ready. David Lawson paced back and forth, his thoughts racing. He had the evidence. Layla had delivered it, but the true test was still ahead, getting the authorities involved and ensuring that Khalid didn't escape. But that was a risk. The game was no longer just about money. It was about power, and Khalid wasn't a man to surrender easily. The doors to the conference room burst open with a loud bang. 2 FBI agents walked in, their faces stone cold. Behind them stood Khalid, his hands cuffed, his head lowered in defeat. He had been taken down, not by his own doing, but by the clever, determined little girl sitting quietly in the corner. But the sense of victory was short-lived. As Khalid's eyes met David's, the smugness that had defined him all along still lingered. He wasn't done. Not yet. "You think this is over?" Khalid spat, his voice bitter and full of venom. "You think this is the end?" David stood tall, his eyes locked on Khalid with quiet fury. "It is. You're finished. You'll spend the rest of your life behind bars, and all the money in the world won't save you." Khalid smirked, a hollow, mirthless grin stretching across his face. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." He sneered, turning his head toward Layla. "You really think you've won? You think you've exposed me? You have no idea what's coming. The world doesn't work the way you think it does, little girl." Layla didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "The world doesn't work the way you think it does either, Khalid. And it's not your world anymore. You're done." The FBI agents moved in, their hands tightening around Khalid's arms as they prepared to escort him out of the room. But before they could drag him away, he spoke again, his words slow, deliberate, meant to pierce through the walls of the room. "You think this is the last of me?" he growled. "I've made deals with people you'll never understand. I've bought governments. I've bought judges. Do you really think you're safe?" His words were a warning, one that sent a chill through the room. Khalid wasn't just any criminal. He was a man with connections that could make him a threat even in handcuffs. But Layla didn't flinch. She didn't need to. "We'll deal with you," she said coldly, "and the rest of your empire will crumble. You can't buy your way out of this." David nodded, his gaze never leaving Khalid. "Take him away." As the agents led Khalid out of the room, Layla turned to David. Her expression was calm, but inside, her heart was still pounding. She had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. They had exposed Khalid. They had stopped his plan. But now, They had to face the consequences of everything he had built. David took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he ran them through his hair. We're not done yet, Layla. There's more to clean up, more that we have to untangle. But you've done something no one else could. You've saved us. You've saved so many lives. Layla nodded, but there was a new resolve in her eyes. She wasn't finished either. This is just the beginning, she said quietly. The door to the conference room closed with a soft click, leaving Layla and David alone. For a moment, there was a shared silence between them, both of them taking in what had just transpired. Khalid's empire had fallen, but the ripple effects of his actions would be felt for years to come. David stepped forward, his voice a whisper. What you did today, it's more than anyone could have imagined. You're not just a hero, Layla. You're a force. Layla looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet certainty. I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. David smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I think you just changed the world, Layla. You're going to do great things. But Layla's focus was already on something else. As she glanced at her tablet, a new message popped up on the screen. It was a text from Mrs. Amina. Thank you for saving us. The children are safe. Layla's lips curved into a small smile. She wasn't finished yet. There were still people out there who needed help, still families who needed saving. She wasn't done with her work, and as long as there was injustice in the world, she would keep fighting. But even as she prepared for the next chapter of her journey, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle had only just begun. 1 year later, Layla Bennett stood tall in front of her office, the brass nameplate on the door gleaming in the afternoon light. Dr. Layla Bennett, Chief Youth Linguistic Consultant, read the words etched into the polished gold. But what lay behind the door was far more than a title. Inside, Layla's office was filled with certificates of recognition, each one a testament to her extraordinary work in languages and social justice. She had transformed from the invisible cleaning lady's daughter into a globally recognized genius, a force in both the legal and humanitarian worlds. Her achievements had been featured in news outlets, on social media, and in countless interviews. People were finally listening, but it wasn't the accolades that mattered most to Layla. It was the community she had helped save. The Ortiz kids now had their own rooms in a housing complex that had been built from the very funds Khalid had tried to steal. The refugee families she had helped with translations were now thriving, no longer trapped in a system that had failed them. As Layla sat at her desk, reviewing case files in 5 different languages, she felt a tap on the door. Without looking up, she called out, "Come in." The door creaked open, and David Lawson stepped inside, holding a small folder. Layla glanced up from her work, offering him a small smile. "What brings you by today, Mr. Lawson?" she asked, her voice playful, though the respect they shared was unmistakable. David smiled, walking over to her desk and dropping the folder in front of her. "This," he said, "I wanted you to see this first." Layla picked up the folder, her brow furrowing slightly. She opened it, and her eyes widened. It was an official document from a prestigious university, Harvard, to be exact. Layla had been accepted. Not only that, but she had been offered a full scholarship. The world was now opening up to her in ways she had never imagined. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she felt a swell of emotion rise within her. I can't believe this," she whispered, barely able to contain her excitement. David leaned against her desk, his expression warm with pride. "You earned it, Layla. Every word, every step you've taken has led to this moment. You've earned every opportunity coming your way." Layla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had accomplished. But her mind quickly shifted to the next challenge, the next mission. "But this doesn't change what I'm doing here," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "I'm not leaving. Not yet. There's still too much work to do." David nodded. "I know. You've already changed so many lives, Layla, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to do so." Layla stood up from her desk, her fingers tracing the names of the refugee families, the kids, the people she had promised to help. "I didn't learn all of this to sit in a classroom. I learned it so I could make a difference, so I could give people a voice when no one else would listen." As if on cue, Tara appeared in the doorway, her face glowing with pride as she stepped into the room. She had become the director of community outreach, helping other families and children like Layla had been, ensuring they had the tools to succeed. "Look at you," Tara said, tears in her eyes. "My baby girl, changing the world." Layla smiled and hugged her mother. "We did it, Mama," she whispered. Together. Just as they embraced, Layla's phone buzzed. She glanced at the message, her eyes scanning the screen quickly. It was a text from Mrs. Amina. "The children are learning. They are ready to speak for themselves now." Layla's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about the languages she had learned. It was about the lives she had touched, the communities she had helped lift up. David watched Layla, awe in his eyes. "You've come so far, Layla, and you've just started." But Layla's gaze was already focused ahead, the same fierce determination burning in her eyes. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. As she glanced at her tablet, a new message popped up on the screen. It was from Mrs. Amina. "Thank you for saving us. The children are safe." David smiled and placed a hand on Layla's shoulder. "You've changed the world, Layla. The world needs more people like you." As Layla gazed out of the window at the city below, she couldn't help but reflect on everything she had overcome. The challenges, the obstacles, the people who had tried to stand in her way. She had gone from being the worthless daughter to becoming one of the most powerful voices in the room. But for Layla, this wasn't about accolades. It was about showing the world that intelligence didn't wear expensive suits. It didn't come with a college degree. It wasn't confined to a classroom. Intelligence came from the heart, from the desire to make the world better, from the courage to stand up against injustice. And as she stood there, ready to take on whatever came next, Layla knew that her story wasn't just her own. It was the story of every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. Every child, every woman, every immigrant, every voice that had been overlooked. Because sometimes the most powerful people in the world are the ones you least expect. The room fell silent, contemplating her words as they echoed through the space. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed today's story, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another heart-pounding cinematic tale from Black Justice Tales. Here's a quick question for you. What would you do if you had the power to change someone's life with just your voice?